The National Desk, America's News Now.
Negotiations failed. Strikes begin as Auto Workers of America hit the picket lines. Not a total work stoppage. We're going to tell you how many people walked off the job and where.
We wanted to be the target. We thought that if we were the target, because our product is so hot in the marketplace and Chrysler makes so much profit off of it, that it would be an easier strike to win.
Then whipping strong winds. Hurricane Lee inching closer to New England. Just ahead, the timeline and where it's now expected to make landfall. Plus, a request to approve a psychedelic Schedule I drug to treat PTSD. The research that could help bring it to the market. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. Right now, residents across New England are bracing for Hurricane Lee, and you can see its path right here. It's expected to make landfall tomorrow in Canada, but it's still forecast to bring severe weather to much of New England. And we want to give you a live look now at the Rhode Island coast. Lee is expected to bring rough surf and flooding. Tropical storm warnings are in place from Massachusetts to Maine. Heavy rain and winds up to 80 miles per hour will really start to pick up tonight, threatening to take down trees. Residents are preparing for possible power outages. Lee is expected to weaken to a tropical storm tomorrow. And walking off the job, auto workers are officially on strike today after their contract expired at midnight, the deadline to ink a new deal with the big three automakers. Today, we learned the White House is going to intervene. The president dispatching 2 aides to Detroit in an effort to move discussions along. This is the first time in history that auto workers at all 3 car manufacturers, GM, Ford, and Stellantis, are striking at the same time. Here's what we know right now. Instead of a full walkout, the union targeted 3 plants today with 12,700 employees, about 9% of the workforce. We saw a strike at GM's Wentzville, Missouri plant, Stellantis in Toledo, Ohio, and Ford's assembly plant in Wayne, Michigan. All 3 car manufacturers have raised their offers to the union up to 20% in terms of wage increases for a 4.5-year contract, but none have come close to the UAW's demand of at least a 36% increase along with a 4-day work week. President Biden agreed today that the companies should go further in their offers to meet those requests.
The companies have made some significant offers, but I believe they should go further to ensure record corporate profits mean record contracts for the UAW. Let me say that again. Record corporate profits, which they have, should be shared by record contracts for the UAW.
But now that a strike is underway, it's putting President Biden and his pro-union stance to the test. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar has a closer look at why the dispute presents extra challenges for the White House.
We are the union! We are the union! The very first United Auto Workers strike against all of the big 3 car makers, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. It's a strike that in just 10 days could cost the economy $5 billion, according to consulting firm Anderson Economic Group. In 2019, GM UAW workers went on a strike that lasted 40 days, which GM says cost them about $3 billion. But it's a very different economy now than it was in 2019. High inflation is keeping consumer sentiment low. New car prices are about 3% higher than they were a year ago. Supply chain disruptions from a strike could only make that worse. The president has been in contact with all negotiating parties, but it's a delicate balance for Biden, who's long said this.
And I'm proud to be the most pro-union president.
The UAW endorsed Biden in 2020, but hasn't said yet if they'll back him in the 2024 race. The president now sending 2 members of his administration to Detroit to assist negotiations.
Let's be clear. No one wants a strike.
He says record corporate profits should result in record contracts for the UAW. Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, whose district is just west of Detroit, wants the president to stay out of the talks.
I do not believe that the Biden administration should intervene in these strikes or these discussions in any way.
Opposite calls coming from industry. Chamber of Commerce CEO Suzanne Clark.
We do think the Biden administration has got to keep both parties at the table.
Clark later called the strike a natural result of the Biden administration administration's whole-of-government approach to promoting unionization at all costs. Raising the political stakes even higher for the president is the heart of the auto industry being in battleground Michigan. A hit to local economies there could sour voters in this purple state. Biden won by about 150,000 votes in 2020. And in 2016, former President Trump won by fewer than 11,000 votes. In Washington, I'm Atrel Nashar reporting.
Hitting back, attorneys for Hunter Biden say the legal basis for the new federal gun charges against him are likely unconstitutional. On Thursday, the younger Biden was indicted for his purchase of a gun in 2018 while under the influence of drugs. Attorneys now urging a judge to toss out the case, citing a recent appeals court ruling that drug use alone should not automatically prevent someone from obtaining a firearm. Meantime, in the business fraud lawsuit against former President Trump, the trial scheduled to start on October 2nd could be delayed. This comes after Trump's lawyers filed a lawsuit alleging the trial's judge abused his authority. The appeals court expected to make a decision the week after next. And in Trump's 2020 election interference case in D.C., the DOJ said yesterday there was no valid basis for Judge Tanya Chutkan to recuse herself. This comes after Trump's lawyers filed a motion asking the judge to step aside because of possible bias. Trump's motion is not likely to succeed. Revealed today, Twitter, now known as X, did try to conceal more than 30 Donald Trump tweets from the special counsel investigating the former president before finally turning over the information that was subpoenaed. But because they let the court-ordered deadline pass before doing so, a judge has ordered X to pay $350,000 in fines. We turn now to the latest in the classified documents case. Trump says he never asked a Mar-a-Lago staffer to delete surveillance video sought by investigators. In an interview with NBC's Meet the Press, Trump said he will testify to that claim under oath. The trial for the case is scheduled to begin in May. Trump is facing 40 criminal counts.
What is your verdict?
3 men accused of providing support to a plot to kidnap and harm Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer walk free. William Null, Michael Null, and Eric Molitor were the last of 14 men to face charges in state or federal court over the domestic terrorism case that dates back to 2020. Since then, 9 of the defendants charged have been convicted, while 2 had been previously acquitted. Responding to the verdict, Joanne Hall's chief of staff to Governor Gretchen Whitmer said today's verdict is disappointing, adding that it will further encourage and embolden radical extremists trying to sow discord and harm public officials in this country. Deliberations are underway in the historic impeachment trial of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Not clear how long the Texas Senate will need to reach a verdict, but Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has said the trial will continue through the weekend if necessary. A 2/3 majority is required for conviction. Parental rights in schools is an issue debated all across the country, and now the outcome of a court battle in a small Massachusetts suburb could impact how school systems handle transgender students nationwide. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins has more.
2 parents in the small town of Ludlow, Massachusetts, are suing the public school system for allegedly, purposefully, failing to inform them their 11-year-old began using a new name and new pronouns during the school day.
They weren't even given the information they needed to really make a decision of what is going to be the best for their children.
The parents taking the matter to federal court, arguing the school's decision to withhold this information violates their constitutional right to raise their child.
It's a very serious issue of the schools basically overstepping their bounds, overstepping what they're allowed to do.
The school's actions appear to be in step with guidance outlined by the state's Department of Education, which states some transgender and gender nonconforming students are not openly so at home. School personnel should speak with the student first before discussing a student's gender nonconformity or transgender status with the student's parent. We reached out to the school system's attorney Thursday and have yet to hear back. The topic becoming a hot-button political issue. Critics slamming Randy Weingarten, the leader of one of the largest teachers' unions, who this week compared the current fight for parental rights to those advocating for segregated schools in the 1950s.
Those same words that you heard in terms of wanting segregation post-Brown v. Board of Education, those same words you hear today, parental rights, an attempt to divide parents versus teachers. And that point, it was white parents versus other parents.
And the final outcome of this case in Massachusetts could have nationwide impacts. A ruling on the case is expected in the coming months.
And Kayla, a federal appeals court in Maryland, I understand, heard a similar case. So what happened there?
Well, Amira, 3 parents in Maryland challenged similar guidelines imposed by Montgomery County Public Schools. Those guidelines allow schools to create support plans for transgender students, and they don't require parental knowledge or consent of the plans. The federal appeals court threw out the case, although in the dismissal, the judges did not address the constitutionality of the guidelines, but rather ruled that these specific parents didn't have standing to bring the case because none of their kids are transgender. The Massachusetts case, though, does involve parents of transgender children, and it appears the appellate court will make a decision there. Amira.
More to come on this for sure. Kayla, thank you for that report out of Washington, D.C. Well, coming up, some warn that artificial intelligence could destroy society. The latest from Capitol Hill on efforts to regulate it. Then TikTok continues to draw scrutiny for privacy concerns. Why it was just fined hundreds of millions of dollars. Plus, Seattle bus drivers are concerned about fentanyl smoke on board, despite officials claiming there's no risk. What researchers are now saying. We're back in just 90 seconds. Are you shopping for a home? If so, then you likely already know it is a lot more expensive than ever before. But a new report from Redfin that confirms what our wallets already know. The median monthly mortgage payment is at an all-time high, over $2,600. That's a 14% jump from where we were just a year ago. And it comes as the median sale price in the U.S. in the last 4 weeks was just over $376,000, up nearly 4% from a year ago. Needless to say, not a very buyer-friendly market. What's the future of AI in America? Will the industry be allowed to develop as fast as it wants, or will Congress set some guardrails here? Top titans of technology met lawmakers this week to take a look at that very question. Our Christine Frizzell has more.
It's already being used on the battlefield and in the operating room. Artificial intelligence now presenting a near impossible question for lawmakers on Capitol Hill. how to find the perfect balance of innovation and regulation.
I think this meeting may go down in history as being very important for the future of civilization.
The future of civilization already deeply impacted by the rapid rise of big tech, raising issues about data collection and privacy that so far have been untouchable by Congress.
Just looking at last Congress alone, you had two big bipartisan bicameral efforts, the first around antitrust and the second around privacy, both of which would have impacted some of the concerns we have with generative AI platforms. Neither made it to the president's desk.
Members of both parties in the Senate were also in attendance at the AI meeting. A hearing on the matter already scheduled. But the House has been embroiled in fights over spending. Future AI policy already facing pushback.
I do not want to see government create an agency to approve whether someone can build upon AI.
Warnings about not acting range from a full-scale robot rebellion to more practical everyday changes already playing out.
What often keeps me up at night is the effect of AI potentially in displacing millions of American workers.
Even as he ramps up his own AI development, Elon Musk has been one of the most outspoken about its dangers.
The consequences of AI going wrong are severe. So we have to be proactive rather than reactive.
Critics of Congress say reactive is how they operate best, with predictions a resistance movement fed by lobbyists will return, pushing messages that regulation will stifle competition and endanger privacy, once again diminishing Congress's role in shaping the future. In Washington, I'm Christine Frizzau.
Well, not a good day for TikTok. It has been hit with a fine of roughly $370 million by the European Union for failing to protect children's privacy. The popular video sharing app is accused of making teen users' accounts public by default. The EU also claims it lets kids under 13 onto the app even though they're not supposed to be allowed. TikTok says the fine is excessive and it already fixed those issues. The Better Business Bureau is warning consumers about a popular shopping app called Temu. 50 million people have downloaded this app since it came out last year. The BBB has gotten over 900 complaints for things like poor quality and shipping concerns, but it's also raising some privacy questions. The app collects large amounts of data, and its parent company is located in China. The U.S. is placing new sanctions on Iranian organizations and people deemed human rights abusers. President Biden made the announcement today to mark the anniversary of the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She died in police custody after allegedly wearing her hijab too loosely, sparking widespread protests. The State Department also imposed new visa restrictions. How about this for a turn of events? The currently illegal and psychedelic drug MDMA, also called ecstasy, could get FDA approval to be marketed to treat post-traumatic stress disorders. A company has requested to green-light the drug after a new study found that combined with talk therapy, 86% of participants showed improvement with PTSD, while 69% in a placebo group also improved, and 72% of the MDMA group no longer met the criteria for PTSD. In fact, by the study's end, compared to 48% of those who took a placebo, and no serious adverse effects were observed in the study. Presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy is a 38-year-old businessman who's never held political office. He says he's looking to change Washington, D.C. as we know it. Full Measure's Cheryl Atkinson caught up with him in Iowa, where the first 2024 Republican primary votes in the nation will be cast in less than 4 months.
Let's say you're elected president. What are the first executive actions you'd like on your desk?
Well, the first thing is I want to rescind a lot of the old executive actions that have been wrongfully taken. Take Executive Order 11246, an executive order that created race-based quotas in the private sector, that require any government contractor, that's 20% of the U.S. workforce working for such a company, required to adopt these toxic racial quota systems. I'll take a pen and cross it out, something that no president has actually had the spine to do. But one of the things I want to get started on very early on is cutting the size of the federal employee headcount. That 75% headcount reduction, we're going to get started on day one. So from the FBI to the U.S. Department of Education to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to other branches of government or other branches of the administrative state, I'll be shutting them down using executive authority to do it and on strong legal, principled, constitutional foundations. And I think I'm the only person in this race or in, frankly, modern presidential history who has offered that level of clarity on how we'll actually get that done.
Would you pardon President Trump if you got elected? And
yes.
I think you've made a statement about some of the January 6th suspects.
So I'm going to pardon on day one, not on the last day, which is what many presidents wait for, on day one, anyone in this country who has been a victim of a politically motivated persecution or prosecution. How do I define that? If someone else under similar circumstances would not have been prosecuted or was not prosecuted, that's evidence of a politically motivated prosecution if it's based on political views. So take Julian Assange. He sits in a foreign prison in exile, while Chelsea Manning, the government official who leaked to Julian Assange, had her sentence commuted by President Obama because she's transgender. That's a disparate standard. Julian Assange gets a day one pardon.
Edward Snowden.
Edward Snowden gets a pardon under my watch. Now, that would be technical about the terms we use. He would get clemency. He hasn't been prosecuted. But I think that exposing the unconstitutionally flagrant violations of a government, especially after he has already served in some ways for taking that risk, deserves to finally move on with his life, and so our country can move on with our own national life. And yes, in that category, Donald Trump absolutely will get a day one pardon under my watch, because these are politically motivated persecutions. And my standard is, how do we move our nation forward? That's what I'm focused on. So on January 20th, that's what I'll be doing. Restore one standard of the rule of law, put into motion shutting down the FBI, such that on January 21st, I'm not worried about the Trump family or the Assange family. I'm worried about every American family. But we have to get that right on January 20th, my first day, so that on January 21st, we can start on the rest of the agenda.
We'll be hearing from other Democrats and Republicans, including Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. One note, we've been asking Joe Biden for an interview since 2019 and are still hoping he'll agree at some point. For Full Measure, I'm Cheryl Atkinson.
And a new episode of Full Measure with Cheryl Atkinson airs this Sunday. Check your local listings for times and the channel. Also, don't miss the Full Measure After Hours podcast, available wherever you download your favorite podcasts. And coming up, a student was handcuffed after he asked an officer for a ride home from school. The explanation the sheriff's office gave for the incident. We'll be right back. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America. In Columbus, Ohio, a 3-year-old is recovering after a coyote attacked her in broad daylight. Her mother says she wasn't far from her daughter at the time.
All of a sudden, I heard a screaming like I've never heard before. Most of her bites were on her thigh. Thankfully, it wasn't nowhere vital. However, there was also a couple on her head, which is even more terrifying.
The girl was released after 2 days in the hospital, and doctors say she will fully recover.
So this is the response that the police officer gave. handcuffing you like a criminal and bringing you home.
In El Paso, Texas, Henry Perez was visibly upset as he shared his reaction to finding out that his son, Chaos, had been handcuffed and placed in the back of a sheriff's unit after he asked a school resource officer for a ride home. Chaos had missed his bus and left his phone at home. The officer said handcuffing him was the policy. When asked about the incident, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office sent a statement saying the officer misunderstood that policy.
Metro wants us to do this job, and they're not helping us do this job.
Eric Christensen has been a bus driver in Seattle for years.
I was irate.
That's how he felt when health officials and transit leadership used the new UW study to publicly claim there was little to no risk from drug smoke exposure on board.
From the public health perspective, the risk is minimal to negligible, both to operators as well as riders.
You got to have long-term data. And they don't have that. They didn't even test the drivers.
The research team is backing up Eric, saying in a statement to Como News, quote, "It is not accurate in the perspective of the UW researchers to state that the air is safe or the transit environment is risk-free for the operators who could experience long-term chronic exposure to these drugs at work."
Coming up, a sweater worn by Princess Diana just sold at an auction. How much the iconic fashion statement went for, we'll tell you on the other side. It's the most valuable sweater ever sold, and it has sheeps on it. You can't make that up. Princess Diana's iconic black sheep sweater swept up for a whopping $1.1 million. Diana made headlines when she wore the iconic piece of fashion to once then Prince Charles polo matches. The sweater designers found it in their attic with some dust on it earlier this year. Sotheby's auctioned it off yesterday. Bidding jumped more than $800,000 in the last 15 minutes. Pretty incredible. Before we go tonight, a Happy New Year to all of the millions of Jews around the world celebrating Rosh Hashanah this weekend. That begins at sundown tonight. May you have a fruitful year ahead. And that does it for this edition of the National Desk. We invite you to join us tonight for more news. I'm Amira David. Thanks for watching.